10 years in the future, once you have technology out there, somebody's going to misuse it. So there is a fringe element that cobbles together their own Jaegers. One of those Jaegers we meet early on in the movie is a tiny 40 feet tall Jaeger called Scrapper that Amara, one of our characters, has built herself.
Scrapper's not a toy, and she's not for sale.
I actually wanted to get a better idea of how Amara built Scrapper. So I actually talked to the people who built her on paper and all the blueprints and what they wanted to add to Scrapper. For example, she lives in Santa Monica, so she took pieces from the Santa Monica pier. Like there's some bumper cars for the foot.
Welcome to Alumni Live. Thanks for coming, everybody. Today we're going to be talking with the editor who edited what we just saw on screen, Mary Graff Ashley. Thank you,
Hi.
Mary, for being here.
Thanks for having me on here.
All right, so Mary, tell me what we just were watching there. What was that?
So that's a behind the scenes piece for Pacific Rim Uprising that was on the DVDs. And what I often do is produce as well as edit. So I pretty much did most of that. I might have had a rough script, but kind of pulled together the interviews, put it all in place. And yeah, it's funny now I'm thinking I would have shown a bit more of John Boyega. That was good to have him in that movie.
Always looking at your work and adjusting. I do the same thing all the time with what I edit. So, I mean, your resume, when we look at your resume, it reads like a list of all my favorite stuff. And I've seen a lot of your work, right? So you've done the behind the scenes for Lost, obviously Pacific Rim. You've done the behind the scenes for the Hobbit movies, Lord of the Rings, and of course, King Kong, which was something that was a really important thing for me. I think some of the, the students and maybe alumni watching might be wondering, how do you get involved with these, huge franchises, and specifically doing that behind the scenes work that you do?
Well, and for Lost, I would have loved to do behind the scenes, but it was promos for that one. But I guess behind the scenes, I was thinking about it is pretty similar. It's all marketing materials, because they want to sell that DVD. And I mean, things are obviously changing now, but DVD, Blu-ray, and, streaming, I hope they'll start showing more behind the scenes. But I started out at a trailer house, and that's obviously movie advertising, marketing, but I got to spend time in the home video department. And then we got to do behind the scenes for X-Files. And I just fell in love with it, doing documentary, content. There's so many different names for it. And then just kept in touch. Like I know a lot of the other alums say it's all about who you know. And so people I knew would move to different companies, and I'd keep in touch and kind of just evolve to be at another place where they just mainly do DVD content. I just call it DVD. That's the phrase I use. Yeah, so I love learning from the stories. I love telling stories and kind of hearing the filmmakers and the actors' perspective and how they approach their work.
Yeah. And that's, for all those same reasons, I love watching those. And you can really feel in the work that, like we just watched that Pacific Rim one, you can really feel that, kind of curiosity and interest, you put in there. Like the things that I would ask questions for end up showing up on screen. So I'd get a lot of my questions asked. How do you decide what goes into these promos, into these behind the scenes pieces?
There's a lot of different variables and elements. It's the producer you're working with, the boss, the production company, because I've been at a lot of different vendors and studios, and then obviously the clients on their end. But if you're lucky, often they let the company do what they do. Usually you send them a rough outline. This is from the company perspective, not so much mine, but they say we're going to kind of do these pieces in this kind of rough write-up. And then, yeah, we just kind of, it's really who's running the interviews too. If you get to submit questions, or if your company is hosting the interview and shooting it themselves and asking, that's the best, because then you can get the info you want. A lot of times it'll come up that a client is like, didn't they talk about such and such, or can't we have them say this? And we're like, sorry, it wasn't asked and they didn't answer it, so we don't have it.
Ah, sure. It's the same thing in documentary, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just whatever the conversation was and how it kind of almost makes itself. And then, of course, sometimes there's certain points where you want to mention certain stories from filming or not mention certain things that can't be mentioned for political reasons or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. I imagine in a production, there's, lots of drama and conflict and things. I mean, that's part of the reason we love celebrities so much is you get to see all that. But for promo materials, it sounds like you don't want all of that in there, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just depends. I mean, there's, for liability, there's certain one, it's not often, once in a while, there's something that went down that they're like, yeah, and even if I know those things, and even if I try to stay away from them, and sometimes I think it's clean and they're still like, no, we can't also say, I'm like, oh, okay. But usually it's more just the stories, it's just the actor's perspective and obviously all the filmmakers' perspective. It's rare that they interview editors, but that's always exciting when they have the editor talking about something about the assembly of a film.
Right, which I'm really excited to get in with you. We both do some editing, but before we get into even some of your more recent stuff, I've got something that I got to ask you about because very important for me. Even before I went to Grand Valley, I was gifted this DVD set of the King Kong production diaries. And I understand that you are the person that helped put all these together. You made a couple episodes of these. So we've got some video footage here of that. So this is from, I think, the last episode. And so tell me a little bit about how these came to be. They came, they're really important to me. And so what are we looking at here?
Okay, so this last one is kind of staged, but it's Andy Serkis turning the camera around on us because we were the behind the scenes crew. So it's basically the behind the scenes of the behind the scenes. And so the production diaries were something that were little, I guess, webisodes that seemed kind of new at the time. It was 2005. And they were put online on kongisking.net, which is also the same as the onering.net. And the same guys. So they were put on there every week to kind of get you excited about the movie coming out. And because obviously Kong is a remake a few times over, nothing could ever really be a spoiler. So it was a rare situation where you could do something like that, I think, where you could just show any green screen footage, anything from set, and it's not obviously gonna spoil the story. It's just gonna, they tried not to show the actual facts or what it was actually gonna be like because they saved that for the release. But so we did all different ones, like the extras, the vintage cars on set, some were just on Jack Black or the actors would host. Those were the most fun, or coming back for pickups. And they would, I always thought they're like the best way for students to really kind of see all the different areas of a production behind the scenes. That's one of our editors, Adam Harriman. They really talk to everybody, all the Kiwis on set, even the guy who would have to call for them to stop filming if there's airplanes flying overhead in Wellington. And so they would just show like there's so many different, pretty much anything you could do, you could do it on a film production.
And you're in New Zealand filming this stuff, right?
Yeah, because I got to work in LA on Lord of the Rings behind the scenes. The same company I got to stay on to do Kong, which I kind of went straight into that right the next year. So luckily it's rare because my boss just happened to want his own editors there with him. So we got to go over, and different ones of us would fly over at a time and switch out And yeah, so I went over twice. So each time was about 7 weeks. So that's my husband and I on top of Mount Victoria in Wellington. Love that scenery and backdrop. So yeah, that was such a great experience to get sent over there. That's Franz Joseph Glacier on the South Island. So we did a little bit of traveling while we're there.
And so you're not just, you know, telling the stories of being behind the scenes, you're also engaging in those stories yourselves, right? You're like you said, you know, working with Jack Black, Peter Jackson, right? All these, you know, what are these celebrities like when you work with them?
Yeah, so this was just at one of the evening parties. So that's our camera operator, Nikki, and my coworker, Mac, another editor. And he cuts a lot of shows at a big company out here that does a lot of reality shows. So we would just run. It looks like we're friends, but we really just would run into each other at some, like, you know, wrap party type events. But working, yeah, so that was the first time I was kind of really close to a film set, because being in post, you know, I'm usually in a dark room by myself, which a lot of times I enjoy, but that was kind of fun to be near a production and just have the actors kind of coming and going. It was kind of surreal. Jack Black would come into the kitchen and not know what to do with his plate, and I offered to take it, and he's like, no, I'll put it. You just didn't know where I just felt like I'm a PA again. Just let me help you. But he was just totally down to earth and friendly. So it was just really, I don't know, really energizing to be there during the shoot.
Yeah. Well, and all of those production diaries were really energizing to watch. You know, like I mentioned, that's a huge reason that I wanted to become a filmmaker. You know, it seemed like, you know, it helped take away the veil of mystique, you know, so seeing, you know, the troubles, you know, they were having, and, you know, working through some of that. Like, you did a great job telling those stories and, you know, making them really engaging and accessible for young people. So that's a little bit about how I got into the business. How did you get into the business, like as a start?
So I finished all my coursework at Grand Valley in December '96, and then still needed to do an internship, but I went through commencement and everything, knew I was going to do an internship. So I was writing to, so I took one of the American Cinema Editors catalogs, and at that time it had editors like home addresses in it. I doubt they would do that now. I don't know, maybe they would, but I wrote to I just sent a bunch of cold letters through the mail. So at that time, obviously, it's just, you know, postal systems. You print out your resume on nice paper and, you know, just kind of just really put feelers out there to see if I could do an internship anywhere. And so the one editor that wrote me back was Tucker Wired at Murphy Brown, the original Murphy Brown. It was still going in the late 90s. So this was early 97. And he is originally from Lansing and went to MSU, and his mom still lives in Holland at the time. So that's one of the main reasons he even made the time to reach out. So he got, you know, he said, yeah, we can do an internship. It's going to be unpaid, kind of an apprenticeship where I'm just learning, but it was great. It got me out to LA, and that's my start.
That is so interesting. And, you know, of course, you know, I see on there, if anybody wants to put, you know, your comments in, you could ask Mary questions on Facebook or YouTube. So had you been to LA before, or was that, you know, kind of like the first time you'd ever even thought of that?
No, I mean, I had been to LA in the 80s, and I flew out when I was like 14 and went to an old 80s show that's, I guess, a little bit like Glee, but for young kids, because I had all popular songs in it and Kids Incorporated, and it has a lot of future actor stars that started out on that one. So I just flew out to actually, as a fan, to be in the audience on that show. That's Fergie. A lot of people don't know that Stacey Ferguson is Fergie.
Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas, huh?
Oh
That's
yeah,
so
and
cool.
from her
Wow.
own life and solo career, and that's her.
Wow.
It's us in 1989. So this is kind of funny. So yeah, I never thought of this before as part of like kind of my career journey, but the poster that is the first photo you showed. So when I first got to LA and went to my internship, this poster was on the wall. So this post house I was in had cut the show. So that was just a funny like moment where I thought, okay, I'm in the right place, I'm doing the right thing. Because it was just a show I used to be jazzed about. And then they had cut it there, and the poster was still on the wall in that time because the show had ended in the early 90s, way long after I had stopped watching it. But yeah, the editor of the show was still there, and later a close friend of mine grabbed that poster for me out of the closet that no one wanted. So
It's a big part of your origin story then. It's pretty
it's,
cool you got to have that.
it's kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So throughout your career, and you've been on a lot of productions, and hopefully we were able to cover a lot of those today. But what is some of the? I mean, you've worked at a couple different companies. You've been freelance. What are some things you can tell us about the industry? Maybe difference between freelance and staff work, things like that.
I mean, mainly the difference is security and versus freedom, and health benefits and 401k versus kind of paying into your own future. And then it depends what type of company. Like I've been at trailer house, I've been at promo houses, I've been at places that only do behind the scenes, or maybe they do both. So it depends, do you enjoy coming back onto these same projects? If you're on staff, they'll just keep giving you more and more and more shows or movies or projects. There's always stuff that needs to be done. Whereas freelance, you're free to make your own schedule and travel when you want and take the jobs when they're available, hopefully, and apply for certain ones that you want to get, and work with people you want to work with. So, I mean, there's pros and cons either way. Trying to think. Yeah, just all different opportunities. And I've worked at actually so many different places kind of by choice that it's probably different from someone that had a very clear, straightforward career path, who maybe like a close friend of mine just worked at the one trailer house, and then he's been at Disney this whole time because he loves it. That's what he wants. That's what he does. And I actually like variety. I love moving around and doing all kinds of different projects. And right now I just love security. I have
Yeah.
2 kids, and it's just easier to have a more set schedule at the same place where I'm now.
Definitely. And let's talk a little bit about the career path there. We've got a question from Facebook here. Elisa asks, do you have any advice for editors just starting out in their careers? So now you're at Disney and ABC, right? So what do you see there? New people in their careers, people just starting out?
Good question. It depends if you're saying how to start out when you've already gotten the job or if you're looking for them. But I know they have an internship program at ABC that I didn't know everything about. And we just had like 3 or 4 interns start. And I know a lot of the other coworkers I have now started out there as interns. So they just want to find people that they're going to keep. And a lot of companies do that. So that's the best way to just get your foot in the door any way you can, even if it's kind of an area you don't want to do, or you're not going to end up doing that. Just try it out. Just every job is an opportunity for experience and knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a demo reel, like of all this different stuff that you've put together? Is that something that is a tool for you?
Yeah, I have just some clips in the Vimeo page I sometimes send. I mean, I've been lucky that I often have so many contacts that people really want to go with someone they know or someone that's referred. So that will definitely help to have a nice website, and to show that they can kind of see who you are and kind of get a sense of the kind of cutting style and the work that you do.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great advice. So thanks, Elisa, for that question. So over the course of your career, what have you seen change in the industry in terms of either technology or even like positions, right? So have assistants been the same and things like that? Yeah. So what have you seen change?
Everything. So, yeah, I mean, when I started, well, at Grand Valley, we were on Media 100, learning that. So that felt really new to do nonlinear editing. And
What is a Media 100?
That's nonlinear editing, similar to Premiere and Avid. So that was just another brand. I don't know what it would be similar to today. Suzanne Zach could tell you. So I learned that, you know, a few classes before graduating, and then coming out to LA, everything was on Avid. And Avids were humongous and took up like a small room. And there'd be, you know, a humongous RMag that could carry 3 gigs that you'd have to put all these different ones in to get your media insanity. And now look at what our phones do. Just insanity. They do everything.
Yeah, that whole room is inside of one phone now, right? Inside of one app even.
I mean, the whole universe is really.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I was trying to think. And then, oh yeah, so things would evolve obviously in editing. So then I ended up just being on Avid several years, and then that would evolved, and then a lot of companies moved to Final Cut, and now Premiere. Coworkers, you know, most people are always moving up, doing more interesting things, going from PA to assistant editor and then editor, depending on the path. Sometimes they want to be producers. And I'm actually in the whole marketing path, which you never really think about in film school, but like everything's got to be advertised and sold. You know, social media didn't exist when I started. It's such a free, easy way to market things, but everything was on tape. You know, even though we were cutting on Avid, everything went to a 3/4 tape, and we'd have to physically drive it over to Disney, and so that the execs could watch a 30-second spot. It's kind of funny.
Not as fast as an email, huh?
Right. So, yeah, everything's digital, and it's so handy for so many things. So there's a lot more possibilities of job opportunities as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious about, you were talking about cutting trailers. How is cutting a trailer different than some of those more long form pieces we saw? What do you look for when you make a trailer?
It depends. It depends on the whole marketing plan for the movie. Even execs sometimes aren't sure, and they'll try a bunch of different routes and premises. I mean, sometimes you'll have to come up with the story for the movie, if to tell it differently or tell it more in a more exciting fashion. Yeah, it's basically, it's like trailers are a lot more intense than TV promos. So it's long hours. It's really getting a sense of how the movie should really be marketed. And I haven't done a lot of big movie trailers. There's a podcast of people who have. Yeah, there's a podcast called Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods or something like that. Trailer Gods and Teaser Geeks. That's really cool. I mean, that's kind of fascinating. It's really for insiders behind the scenes of the trailer industry. But when I worked at trailer houses, I would cut, TV spots for the films or help on trailers. And yeah, it's hard to put it into words.
Yeah, I mean, so things that I'm thinking of is what do they hand you to edit those TV spots? Like what is the raw material that you're working with?
Well, we have the film, and it'll be in different stages. So they'll send whatever the current state of the film is. So when I started in 1997, it would be, the recent cut of the film. And because with Avid, you had to put things in at a low resolution. So there'd be just, just titles all over it saying which company you're at and ways to make, everything was so low res. There wasn't so much worry that things would be pirated, although that still could happen. But everything was just in a super early state with a lot of X's over it. And you just kind of cut together from what you can sense it's going to be. Like animation would come often as drawings. Sometimes Disney would start marketing like a whole year before. And then as the animation gets finished, it would come in. So every like month or so, there'd be a new version of the feature. And then there's times when certain things you put in a trailer, won't even end up in the movie. It'll get cut, but they still let it stay in the trailer. So that's why that happens sometimes, because you've been working with it all this time and the clients like it. And for some reason, the filmmaker will take it out.
That is so interesting. And I'd imagine that's even more fast paced when you're doing television stuff. Some of those changes I understand go pretty close to the air date.
Yeah, it can. Although there's not as much pressure and not as much weighing on it because it's already a show. So those spots kind of go through faster. They kind of, there can be intensity in certain things they want to push to make sure everyone knows about it. And then there was like extra pressure on Lost, of course, like a high profile show like that. But generally, you work with a producer and they give you a script and you come together collaboratively, come up with spots that kind of are done in more like a week or less, rather than some trailers can take months to do.
Yeah, so you kind of you get that footage, and within a couple of days you've already got to start getting versions out. What is that experience like for reality shows?
For this one show I was on, More Than Human, it was a bunch of us had different segments, and so I think there was just a regular schedule. I think they were cutting a show once a week or maybe in a couple weeks. I can't recall because it was like 15 years ago. But we each would do a segment and kind of have our own little area doing it, and then we put it all together and send it and see what the notes are. Yeah,
I'm curious about what is that team dynamic. So, on a when you're editing either with a trailer house or with as you're at ABC Disney now, what is that team? What positions are there? Who's kind of working with you?
Again, it depends on the project, but usually you have a creative producer and you'll collaborate with them. Not always. A lot of times editors are kind of expected to do their own producing. So it just depends, how they're doing it. In some cases, you'll get handed a script, whether it's for a promo or a trailer or behind the scenes, or sometimes you'll not get anything and you just kind of have to pull together what you think is going to work and then show it to people. And sometimes it's fine and they love it. And sometimes then they start thinking about it and then you have to start over. So, my favorite situations are when it's collaborative, like it's a good hybrid of the two. You get to kind of work on it yourself and kind of feel what the material should be, but then you've got someone to check in with who's kind of guiding you and has a sense of it as well.
And so when you're like working with these other teammates, what is that dynamic usually like? Is it, are you working in the same room? Is everybody, pretty collaborative, or do egos clash? What kind of a feel is it in those editing rooms?
I've been in so many different editing rooms. Let's see. Yeah, it depends. Sometimes you're in a room late together and have to get something done. Sometimes, they don't kind of live in your room. They I've been at a few places where there's a desk in the room for the producer, but ideally they have their own office and they'll check in. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to be, I don't mean to be nebulous, but it's depends on the gig, and it depends how, I guess, whatever the producer knows, and the boss and the whole layer of approval, like it depends what they know. Maybe they know info that you don't know, like who they need to feature, and often they share that, but sometimes they forget, you know, what needs to be said, you know, what the kind of marketing brief is. And then you just kind of, yeah, every project is different. It just evolves out of that space.
Mm-hmm. What role does music play in the pieces that you put together? When do you bring that into the process? Is it always the same track? What, you know, how do you work with music?
Music is so integral, right? It's for promos, you know, often you can't spend much money on it. So we have a whole library at ABC of kind of library music, we call it, or needle drop, that is already, you know, paid for, or, you know, someone gets a small royalty for it. For trailers, there's a much bigger budget, so they can use regular songs that you would know, and that you can just pay for those if you got the budget. Like for Bug's Life, I was there when the Disney client wanted to use The Who, Baba O'Reilly, and I think it cost like 50 grand.
Whoa.
And I do the whole like music budget on that. But I mean, they buy it in perpetuity so they can use it for all the marketing. But yeah, he always added classic rock songs. But yeah, so it's just a matter of what, you know, doing behind the scenes. You can often use the film score, like for Lord of the Rings, that worked well. For Kong, it didn't work as well because there wasn't enough kind of orchestral stuff that could be underscore. It was very intense from this feature, so we were like, what do? We need something else. So the studio just sent us Waterworld that we could just use.
Really?
They owned it, so not in the production diaries, but I also cut the Origin of Kong piece on the DVD, so you'll hear it in that, at least in the first one, and it worked. So I'm glad we had some use.
I do have that Origin of Kong here. You mind if we play a little bit of that and maybe talk about it?
Sure. Go
All
for
right.
it.
So here it comes. And so things that I'm going to be, you know, kind of curious about as we watch this is, you know, what are, you know, maybe some of the decisions you make? You know, how did you decide to order different things? So here it comes.
The first time I saw the original Kong was in New Zealand on TV, a Friday night, and I would have been about 8 or 9 years old, probably about 1970. It was King Kong that actually started my love of fantasy and science fiction. So before that, even though I'd been making little Super 8 movies, they were mainly World War II films, and Kong was one of those defining moments in your life where everything changed after I saw Kong. For starters, you know, it gave me a real sense of what I wanted to do as a career, which wasn't actually.
So a lot of that footage there is his home movies, right? That's stuff that he gave you?
Yeah, I'm glad to had gotten involved in Peter Jackson Productions, because he's basically always been doing his own behind the scenes of himself. And he has more shots of him as a kid trying to make King Kong. I mean, that's what this piece is about. Yeah, so he sent us these photos. Some of the previous footage he had already sent for one of his other behind the scenes pieces for The Frighteners. And I think by 2005 or 2006, when we were cutting the special features, he didn't have any new video to send us, but it still works. It works well in there.
Yeah. Is that so? And this was, you said 2005. So how has your process evolved since you were making this? Do you feel like you've, you know, changed any of how you work at all?
Good question. I'm pretty similar because I always put down try to get all the audio in first. I mean, I think a lot of people do that, and it kind of goes without saying, but I really just try to get the story down, and then even music and sound effects. I mean, sound effects can go last, but it just helps to know what you're hearing, and then you just do all your B-roll coverage. So really it's really just having, the best interview clips of Peter Jackson telling his own story. I mean, he really does it for you. I think there's a few different interviews from him in this piece that we used kind of all of it. And this last interview didn't come until last, so we weren't sure how it was going to get started. So there were just different stages of the interview process where my boss would ask him different questions. So luckily we got this last, and then we were able to it intros this whole time of his life, this whole story.
Yeah, so interesting. When you do these pieces, you had mentioned that there's a producer you work with that always likes to put in classic rock music. Do you feel like you have a style? Are there like certain Mary Graff Ashley isms that you could say, oh, that's a piece of my work?
I don't know. I love so many different kinds of music. I kind of like slower storytelling. I guess that would be my vibe, which worked for Peter Jackson. He just likes to tell the story. It didn't need to be flashy or over the top. So I don't know. I just try to see what feels right, and if it feels like it's the right pace, then I do it that way.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe one of my last questions here as we wrap up. Do you have any just really funny stories from working on stuff, or times where you're down to a deadline and great hero moments or anything?
I mean, on the production diaries, that we did in New Zealand, it was just a couple of us in a room with some laptops, really. So it was so low tech, but it was a week-long process for each one. And we'd have to kind of figure out what stories we could tell at the beginning of the week, cut it together, show it to our boss maybe Thursday, and then Friday it would go on the website, right? So there were times that our boss wasn't able to look at it until Thursday or Friday, and then decide what he wanted to do. And then we'd have to kind of spend the next 36 hours just kind of making it happen. And I did a whole 24-hour shift. That was just one time that happened. There's been other times, but my coworker was actually there longer than me. He was there like 36 hours. So, but it felt at the time, when you're young and you're in another country, you just feel like it's kind of exciting, but also, couldn't we have done it like on Tuesday?
Well, Mary, thank you so much for being here. It really is an honor. I've seen, like I said, so much of your work, and am maybe your biggest fan. So I really appreciate seeing you and getting to talk through some of your work.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks. And for everybody else out there, Alumni Live is on Facebook and YouTube. And if you want to subscribe, we'd appreciate that. And we'll have lots of other alumni coming on here to talk about their process and ways to get in the industry. So thanks, everybody.
Subscribe.
Subscribe.